Good evening. Hope all of you are doing well. Tonight we're learning Maseches Pesachim, Daf Kuf Beis 102. Getting close, just another 2.5 weeks or so until we are Messiahing this Masechta. Right now we're a little bit more than halfway down on Kuf Aleph Amud Beis. As a background, to start, we're going to be questioning the Shita of Rav Chizda. Rav Chizda's opinion is about 1/3 of the way down on Kuf Aleph Amud Beis, and there he was of the opinion that if a person were to be eating a meal for which the bracha achrona was either birkas hamazon or a bracha me'ein sheva. So he says that in that case, if you change locations, ein tzarech levarach, you don't have to make a bracha. So says the Gemara, the Shita of Rav Chizda is going to be questioned from a source in the Tanaim, from a Tosefta in Maseches Brachos. A little bit more than halfway down, Kuf Aleph Amud Beis, the Gemara is asking on Rav Chizda as follows. B'nei Chabura shahim mesubin lishtos. There was a group of people who were mesubin, they were eating, they were drinking. V'akru raglehem, they got up out of their chairs. Why did they leave their chairs? Let's say likras chasan or likras kala. They went out, they saw the chasan and kala walking through the community. They went to go wish a mazel tov. So the benches cleared, everybody left. Kshen yotzin ein te'unin bracha lemafreya. When they are on their way out to go greet the chasan and kala, they do not need to make a bracha lemafreya, which here is a reference to a bracha achrona. Kshein chozer, and when they come back from greeting the chasan and kala, ein te'unin bracha lechatchila, they don't have to go back and make the bracha rishona. We can assume that their initial brachos are intact. Says the Tosefta, 2/3 of the way down, Bamet dvarim amurim. When do we assume that the initial brachos are intact? Shehinichu sham zaken ochola. When someone who wasn't well enough to leave the table is still at the table. So you have someone who is incapacitated, an elder person or someone who's ill, and they stay at the table. That's when we say ein te'unin bracha lemafreya lechatchila. That's when we don't need new brachos. Aval, says the Tosefta, lo hinichu sham lo zaken v'lo chole. If the entire table cleared out, nobody's left at the table, then kshen yotzin te'unin bracha lemafreya. Then on their way out, they need to bench. Kshein chozer, when they come back in, they need to make a new bracha, te'unin bracha lechatchila. So that's what the Tosefta says. Close scene. Now let's analyze this. Midikatani, because the Brisa says akru raglehem, that they got up and they left the table. Michlal, what does it imply about this meal? That it was a serious meal. We must be talking about what does akru mean. If you're having a little piece of fruit, no one would say akru raglehem. Obviously, you're having a gezunt meal. There's bread, there's mizonos, whatever it is. It's a serious meal. That must be what this Tosefta is talking about. The taima, and the reason why we said in the Reisha of this Tosefta that there's no need for a new bracha is because because someone was left at the table, either an elder person or someone who was ill. That when there's someone still at the table, that's when we don't need a new bracha. Aval. If in fact there was if there was no one left at the table, then kshen yotzin, when they do leave, what would the din be? That would be a diuk from the Tosefta. The halacha should be kshen yotzin te'unin bracha lemafrei, kshen chozer te'unin bracha lechatchila. So this is very different than the Shita of Rav Chizda, because it says the language of akru ragleim. It implies that they're having a serious meal. So if they're having a serious meal, what do we see? We see the distinction in the Tosefta applies in a case of a serious meal, where the bracha achrona is birkas hamazon or bracha me'ein sheva, that we see in those cases that we make the distinction of whether or not there's someone at the table. And what is clear from the Tosefta is that the distinction is certainly the case that one is obligated to make a new bracha if there's no one left at the table. And that is different than what Rav Chizda said, because Rav Chizda did not make the distinction of zaken v'chola still at the table versus not at the table. So this Tosefta doesn't agree with the Shita of Rav Chizda. Kasha le Rav Chizda. This is a question on the Shita of Rav Chizda. How does Rav Chizda get out of this? Bottom line of Kuf Aleph Amud Beis says the Gemara Amar Rav Nachman Bar Yitzchak, turning to the top of Kuf Beis Amud Aleph, Mantana Akiros. Who is the author of that Tosefta? Who is the one who speaks about Akiros, where we make a distinction between the Chol and the Zaken? Says the Gemara, Mantana Akiros, it must be Rabbi Yehuda. Tanya, the Brisa writes, Chaverim shayim mesubin v'aku ragleim leilech lebeis hakneses or lebeis hamedrash. They're people, friends, they're sitting, they're having a Suda. The akru ragleim, same language, they got up out of their seats, they're having a chashav meal, and they went to go to Daven Mincha, and they went to go to the Beis Medrash. So what's the din? Kshen yotzin, if they're going to go out to the Beis Medrash, Beis HaKnesses, what's the din? 3 lines down. Kshen yotzin ein tu'unin bracha lemafreya. They don't need to say benching on the way out. Uchshehin chozrin ein tu'unin bracha lechatchila. And on their way back in, they don't have to make a new bracha rishona. Their initial brachos were appropriate. Amar Reb Yehuda b'medvarim amurim. When do we say that this is true? Answers the Gemara. Bisman sheinichu sham miksas chaver. When people are left over. Very similar to the Tosefta, which said zakin v'chola, where there were people left over. Here, when it says that there sheinichu sham miksas chaver, people are left over. Aval lo hinichu sham miksas chaverim. If no one was left over, then kshen yotzin. When in fact a person leaves, but the table's empty, tun and bracha lemafreya, then you have to bench on the way out. So that's how Rav Chizda gets out of it. Now, what's not stated in the Gemara, though the Rashbam here at the bottom of the page indicates clearly, is that an interesting idea. When in this brisa it says Bamed Dvarim Amurim, it implies, says the Rashbam, that there must be a machlokes in the Tanaim. And Rav Chizda is holding like the shita that we don't see, the shita of the Rabbanan, as what we are going to call it. And Rav Yehuda is the Tosefta in this brisa. So how we asked a question on Rav Chizda. Rav Chizda was of the opinion that in a case when you're having a serious meal and you walk away from the table, so Rav Chizda said with no distinction of zaken v'chol is still at the table, Rav Chizda said ein tzarach levarich. However, the brisa said tzarach levarich, that if there's nobody at the table. So says the Gemara, that shita of the brisa is the shita of Rabbi Yehuda, the Tana, and Rav Chizda must hold like another shita in the Tanaim. So says the Gemara, 8 lines down, a quarter of the way down on Kuf Beis Mid Aleph, if all of this is true, then we have a question on the shita of Rabbi Yochanan that we saw yesterday. Let's see how the Gemara plays out this question. Elataima, what is the rationale that exists in this brisa that we just learned? Elataima dibidvar matunim bracha lacharim b'makoman, in a case where the meal was a serious meal, where the bracha has to be said in its place. Again, a reference to meals that are made out of bread or that have a bracha achrona of mizonos or birkas hamazon. So in those cases, dekshein yotzin ein tunin bracha lemafreya, u'kshein chozrin ein tunin bracha lechatchila. So that's where we said that you don't need a new bracha because these meals are so chashuv. And as mentioned yesterday, the Shulchan Aruch and Kuf Pei Dalet indicates that when a person says hamotzi, and I washed before I left the house. I pasha forgot to bench, so I have to go home before I bench. If I can make it within zman, it's lechatchila that I should be benching at home. I'll make it home in time, so I'll be able to bench. Otherwise, I should bench here b'di'evet. That's the din. But I broke this halacha right now. You're not supposed to leave. So the halacha is that you should be benching at home. Or you should be benching where you ate. The poskim do write that if you get stuck in a scenario like this and the clock is ticking against you, if you could get one piece of bread, even not a kizayis. So I washed and ate a piece of pizza at home. Now I came here, I pashat forgot to bench. I was just moving quickly. So the halacha, what I'm allowed to do is take one bite of anything that's hamotzi, even not a kizayis, and then I can bench here lechatchila. That's appropriate. I have to go find some bread or I have to get home in time within 72 minutes. The poskim also ask the question, what if you exceed 72 minutes? That's the amount of time that we're familiar with that you have to bench within 72 minutes. So the Piskei Tshuvos in Siman Kuf Pei Daled writes that between 72 minutes and 6 hours, if a person is still full, they're still allowed to bench. Unbelievable. And if they are not full, they could still eat again. So I'm full right now. I could not really eat anything significant. So even if I exceeded 72 minutes, as long as I feel as full as I do, I can still bench. That's okay. And the poskim ask another question. I think we've referenced this before. What if in brachos we discussed this? There are the Mishnah and the Nuns, I think it was, that discusses shas equal. What happens if a person eats a whole suda and they throw up? So now they have no food left in them. There's no kadei svia. The pasuk says ve'achalta v'savata. So are they allowed to bench? That's a big shaila in halacha. To go based on Hanoas Garon only, you ate a kazayas, but you threw up a kazayas. What do? Do you bench? So the poskim say that if it's feasible, if you're feeling a little better, you should eat another kazayas of bread. The benching is a big suffix. You were v'achalta, but the food's not there anymore. You're certainly not v'savata, but you're not feeling well, so you got to play it out. But that's what it's written in Kuf Pei Dalet. If you exceed 72 minutes in regards to not having benched yet, the halacha is that after 72 minutes, if you're still full, you're still allowed to bench lechatchila. Anyway, it says the Gemara that this diuk that we see from this brisa, so the Gemara continues, aval, almost halfway down, aval dvarim she'in tunin bracha la'acharein b'makom. What about foods that are not chashava foods? You're sitting, you're eating lollipops and candy, you're eating some shtiklach, some candy that you got for Purim. So in those cases, afilu the Rabbanon, even not the shita of Rabbi Yehuda, the shita of Rav Chizda, even that shita kshein yotzin tunim bracha lemafreya, if you walk out on that, you should make a bracha achrona. If all you're doing is drinking having a l'chaim, but with no food, lahalacha, you should make a bracha achrona before you walk out of the room. And u'kshein chozrin tunin bracha lechatchila. And when you come back, you should make a new bracha. Says the Gemara, why? Lema tehave tiyufta to Rav Yochanan, because we learned yesterday the shita of Rav Yochanan. Rav Yochanan had said that if a person makes kiddush in shul and then they go home, They don't even have to make a new bracha rishona. They made we're standing in shul now, so I made a borei pri hagafen one day in shul, and then I went home. Do I have to make a new bracha rishon on the borei pri hagafen? Rabbi Yochanan says, no, you're good. But this brisa seems to not say that way. This brisa implies, within the sheet of the Rabbanan, against the sheet of Rabbi Yehuda, it implies that you would have to make a new bracha. How could Rabbi Yochanan then be right? Says the Gemara, Lema tavet yuv to the Rabbi Yochanan. This should be a kasha, the shita that we saw yesterday of Rabbi Yochanan. Says the Gemara, how many times are you going to beat the guy up? Rabbi Yochanan was rejected already. We rejected him with the tiyuv to yesterday. V'lav mi osvine chadazimna. Didn't we already reject him once? You're beating the dead horse. So it says the Gemara, Neima meha name tavet yufta. But you can wriggle your way out of it. Maybe you can come up with a clever answer. So therefore, because of that, maybe we should just tack on a second tiyufta just in case. And in fact, says the Gemara, Amar lach Rav Yochanan would be able to get out of this. How would he do that? Amar lach Rav Yochanan. What would Rav Yochanan have answered to this case? He agrees, Taka. I agree with you that in this particular case, we would not have said that you need to make a new bracha. The fact that it talks about akru ragleim was to teach us about the mechudash case of Rabbi Yehuda, that you don't have to make a new bracha under certain circumstances when people are left at the table, and you do need to make a new bracha with your chashav meal when there are no people left at the table. That is when he would say that, we'll see as the Gemara continues here, that's true. When there are people who are left over at the table, that's when you don't make a new bracha by a bread-based meal when you walk away. However, lo hinichu mikzas chaverim kshein yotzin tu'unin bracha lemafreya kshein chozrin tu'unin bracha lechatchila. There, even Rav Yochanan would agree. There's no argument that it's just all about the shita of Rav Yehuda lo diacha kochan, to show us the chiddush of Rav Yochanan's case, that you would not need to make a new bracha if there were people left at the table, and you would need to make a bracha to bench and to make a new bracha if you left the table to be totally empty. However, the Gemara doesn't accept this shita of Rav Yehuda. And in fact, it goes all the way back to Rav Chizda. Let's remember what Rav Chizda said 1/3 of the way down on Kuf Aleph Amud Beis. This is where we started today. There, Rav Chizda was of the opinion, he said that in a case of Shinui Makom Tzarech Levarech, that a person, when they change locales, they do need to make a new bracha. And that was only true when the meal was a small meal. But if the meal was a significant meal, the halacha is Ein Tzarech Levarech. If you're eating a bread-based meal and you change locations, you don't need to make a new bracha. So says the Gemara, 7 lines from the bottom of Kuf Beis Amud Aleph, a shita to support Rav Chizda. Tanya Kavase de Rav Chizda. What does Rav Chizda say? What does this brisa say? I should say. What does this brisa say to support Rav Chizda? Exactly what he holds. Exactly like Rav Chizda said on the previous Amud, with no distinctions about people left at the table. So the Gemara seems to conclude like the opinion of Rav Chizda. All right, let's continue. Tana Rabbanan, 4 or 5 lines from the bottom of Kuf Beis Amud Aleph, a slightly different sugya. Says the Gemara as follows. This is a Tosefta as well in Maseches Brachos, and the Gemara writes, it's Friday afternoon. There's a group of people eating V'kida Shalem Hayom. It's now Shabbos is upon us. So what do we do now if Shabbos is upon us? So it says the Gemara, Mevi'in lo kos shel yain v'omer alav kedushas hayom. First, they bring a cup of wine and you make kiddush, borei pri hagafen, and whatever the Friday night kiddush is, that's a kiddush that you make, and we're makadesh Shabbos. Beautiful. The sheni, and then they bring a second cup to this person. Omer alav birkas hamazon, and then when the meal's done, they bench. So they basically interrupt their meal to make a kiddush. Maybe this is poris mapo makadesh. The Gemara doesn't say exactly whether or not you're laying out a table, but b'kitzer, you're basically making kiddush followed by benching. That's the shita of Rabbi Yehuda. However, bottom line of Kuf Beis Amud Aleph says Rabbi Yossi, Amar no. Ochel v'holech asher techshach. You can eat until your heart's content, no problem. Top of Kuf Beis Amud Beis. Gamru. Once the meal is finished, Rashi says Gamru seudasan. Rashi did not want us to make the error of reading this Gemara of Gamru Kos Rishon. So that's why he adds in the word Gamru Seudasan, because I read it the wrong way the first time I learned it. Gamru Seudasan, once they finish their meal, the Gemara continues, Kos Rishon Mevarech Alav Birkas Hamazon. Then, unlike Rabbi Yehuda, where he says that your first bracha is for Kiddush, here what you're doing is first you're Mevarech on Birkas Hamazon. V'hasheni, the second cup, Omer Alav Kedushas Hayom, then you make Kiddush afterwards. That's how Rabbi Yossi says we should navigate a case where you're eating from Friday into Shabbos. So says the Gemara, I don't understand. Why do we need two separate cups? Why can't we just chap a wine, just save a little bit of wine? The name Rinhu Latarvayu Achada Kasa. Why can't we just say that we're using the same cup for two things? We're using one cup for Birkas Hamazon and the same cup for Kiddush. So right after, this is a minhag that we're familiar with, and when we have a larger crowd, we're supposed to say Birkas Hamazon on a cup of wine. In fact, the Mishnah Brura, I quoted in Shulchan Aruch, the Mishnah Brura writes that we should be doing this even sometimes by ourselves, even by Yachid, and certainly if there's a minyan, it's appropriate to do so with a group of three. It's appropriate to make this is just for the Kedusha of the mitzvah. This is why by Bris Milah we have a cup, and by weddings we have a cup, so it's a little different. The halachic status is not quite the same as it relates to Birkas Hamazon relative to a wedding and to a bris, where it's much more formal and part of the process, but nevertheless, it's appropriate where possible, where there's enough wine, where there's enough grape juice to make Kiddush halachos. Fine, we'll learn those halachos another time. But so the Gemara here is bothered. Why in the sheet of Rav Yossi does it say that you need two separate cups, one for Birkas Hamazon and one for Kiddush? Just say Kiddush immediately after Birkas Hamazon, and you'll kill two birds with one cup of wine, perfectly fine. Amar Rav Huna, 3-4 lines down, Amar Rav Huna, Amar Rav Sheshes, you're not allowed. Ein omrim shtei kedushos al kos echad, you're not allowed to do two different things with the same cup of wine. Why not? My time, says the Gemara, a famous principle in halacha. Amar Rav Nachman bar Yitzchak. What does Rav Nachman bar Yitzchak teach us? This is the second time in Shas, I believe, that we've seen this. The Fishain osin mitzvos chavilos. You're not allowed to double mitzvos because, according to some Mefarshim, when you do two mitzvos in one fell swoop, it gives the appearance that you're trying to get out of doing the mitzvos. How can I be most efficient? No. How can I serve HaKadosh Baruch Hu? Not how can I be most efficient? And therefore, the Gemara says, Ein osin mitzvos chavilos. Says Gemara below. Really? Are you sure that's right? Because I can show you a case where we violate the rule of Ein osin mitzvos chavilos. What's the case? Third of the way down, 5, 6, 7 lines down. Kuf beis and beis. Below the Hatanya, the Brisa writes, Hanichnas lebeiso b'motzei Shabbos. A person comes home after shul on Motzei Shabbos. A person would then make Havdalah. He would make a bracha on yayin and on me'or and on besamim. And at the end, he'll say the bracha of Hamavdul ben Kodesh L'chom. What if he only has one cup of wine? So what should he do? You have to bench after machlokes here, if it's talking about shal shudas benching, or if it's talking about Malav Malka benching. Either way, this raises the question of having a cup of wine in Shal Shudas. So the Hasidim are big on this. And if you look in the Hasidish Sidurim, you'll see there that it has like a whole beautiful Kiddush. It ends with Borei Priagafa, and it's a lot of psukim, a lot of reading. But nevertheless, it seems to be that for that benching, that it's appropriate to have a cup of wine. But what if you only have one cup of wine? You need a cup for Havdalah, and you need a cup for benching. So this Brisa says, V'imein lo ela kos echad, you only have one. So then we violate the rule. Normally we say, osin mitzvos chavilos. What do we see here? Osin mitzvos chavilos. We say that you use one cup of wine, one for Havdalah, one for benching. So says the Gemara, no, that's not correct. Halfway down, ein lo shiny. When you only have but one cup of wine, what are you supposed to do? You're going to only do one mitzvah? No. So then, fine. B'di'eved, now that we're stuck with only one cup of wine, we'll do whatever we can do. That's life. That's the way things are. Says the Gemara, but wait a minute. The Yom Tov shechalios achar Shabbos to Islay. What about Yom Tov that is chalios achar Shabbos? You have Yom Tov that follows Shabbos. Of course you have wine. Pasha that you have wine. Yet what do we say there? The Amar Rav is of the opinion of Yakne. Yain Kiddush Ner Havdalah. We see there that when Shabbos leads into Yom Tov, what do we do with that Kiddush? And we paskin this way the Dina. We say Havdalah in Kiddush, same cup of wine. So, you said Einosin mitzvos chavilos, but when Motzei Shabbos blends into Yontiv, that Kiddush on Motzei Shabbos has Kiddush and Havdalah in the same Kiddush. You said Einosin mitzvos chavilos. That's not correct. Answers the Gemara with a brilliant insight. Amrei, the answer that you just gave, that when Yontif goes into Shabbos, we say Yakna, Yud Kuf Nun Hey, Yain Kiddush Ner and Havdalah. What's missing? We're used to the phrase of Yakna Haz. We're missing Zman. So says the Gemara, a beautiful answer, or question, I should say. Amrei, Midelo Amar Zman. What's missing from Yakneh is Yakneh Haz. If we're not saying Zman, if we're not saying the bracha, Zman is equivalent to Shechianu. If we're not saying Shechianu, that's only true by one Yantiv. When is that true? We must be talking about the seventh day of Pesach. And if we're talking about the seventh day of Pesach, you're out of food. You're down to 1 cup. So says the Gemara, seventh day of Pesach, he ran out of grape juice. I think I have 30 bottles of grape juice in Kiwi Kids in my basement right now. We are not going to run out of grape juice. Endless. But if you run out, so this is another case of Ein Lo. All I have is 1 cup. So that's why on that Motzei Shabbos, when Shabbos exits and goes into Yontif, we say Yakneh. Yud Kuf Nun Hey, Yakneh Haz, whatever it is, he ran out of food. Fine. But otherwise we'd say Nos Mitzvos Chavilos Chavilos. Says the Gemara, wait a minute. Vayom Tov Rishon de Islay. On the first day of Yontif, Pashat, you have enough wine for the first day of Yontif, right? You for sure prepared for that. The Amar Abaye Yakzina, he says that, and this we'll get into this tomorrow. Abaye says that the order of Kiddush, when Yom Tov Rishon lets out on a Motzei Shabbos, is Yain Kiddush Zman Ner Havdalah. Bore Priya Gafen, Kiddush is Makadesh Yisrael Ba'azmanim, Zayin is Shechianu, Nun is Ner, Hey is Havdalah. And slight distinction, V'Rabba Amar Yaknahaz. He says the order is different. Yain Kiddush Ner Havdalah Zman. What do we see there? 1 cup of wine, both for Kiddush and Havdalah, both according to Abaye and according to Rava. So the question still stands. It's not only true by Shvi Shel Pesach that comes out on a Motzei Shabbos. It's true even by the first days of Yontif when it's a Motzei Shabbos. We see here Einos and Chavilos, Chavilos. So the Gemara gives a Lamdasha answer, and with this we will stop for the night. Ella Havdalah v'Kiddush Chad Milsehi. You're right. You're absolutely right. When it comes to the coalescing of Kiddush with Havdalah, that's one and the same. And there we allow for 1 cup to be used. That's not a violation of Einos and Mitzvos Chavilos Chavilos. That's fine because Kiddush and Havdalah are one. They're one world. It's one world. So you can't ask me Akashia against Einos and Mitzvos Chavilos Chavilos from Kiddush and Havdalah. They're one and the same. However, Birkas Hamazon v'Kiddush Trei Mileninu. But when we have in the world of Birkas Hamazon and Kiddush, that's different. That's when we have the Isser of Einos Mitzvos Chavilos Chavilos. Correct. So this is the Chakira that the Gemara makes for us. Normally, this is like a Rav Chaim Brisker Chakira. The Gemara lays this out for us. We have 2 camps. We have the world of Kiddush and Havdalah. Really, those 2 are one and the same. So there, if you have 1 cup of wine, even if you have endless amounts of wine, Yaknehaz, Yakzina, Yakneh, whatever the iterations of the Gemara, we don't care because you're allowed to use 1 cup for both. It's not a violation of Einos Mitzvos Chavilos Chavilos, but when it's Birkas Hamazon and Kiddush, those 2 things are not the same camp. They're totally different worlds. One's for the covenant of the mitzvah Birkas Hamazon, one's for the mitzvah, totally different. And therefore, says the Gemara, your question falls away. That is why, if you look at the very top line of the Gemara, that's why Rabbi Yossi was of the opinion that Kos Rishon Mevarech ala Birkas Hamazon and Kos Sheni separately is for Kedushas Hayom. We will stop right here and pick up with Gufa tomorrow night, a blot and a half. Shouldn't be too bad. We'll get there. Here's Hashem, a blot and a half tomorrow night. Wishing you all a beautiful night.